Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Diablo 4 and we're going to be going through and ranking all of the one-handed swords in this game based on aesthetics. So, there are 18 swords overall, one-handed swords. I only have 17 and I've played a lot of this game so far and I'm on World Tier 3. So like, I should have been able to find them all by now. I am really struggling to find the last transmog for the swords in this game. So, if you know which one I'm missing, why don't you let me know down in the comments section and, help me work through that problem. But with all that in mind, this will be subjective, obviously, because I can't do this based on, like, their stats or aspects or anything, because you can customize all of that, and they're not unique. But, I can base them on appearance, and that's going to be subjective, because it'll be my personal preferences, which does take into account, A, just how the weapon looks, if it has any weird design elements that I don't like, or if it just has any major things that would make it not a good weapon in real life. I consider all of those things. But with that in mind, let's just get on into it and start off with number 17. And so starting us off at number 17, we have the Royal Bone Blade, and honestly, this one, I just really don't like a lot of things about it. Now, I get the design of it is actually kind of cool. It's got a swept back design, and it does have contrasting colors, including some white and gold in there, which looks cool. However, I don't like how thin it looks at the end, so it looks like just really fragile. I don't like the way that the blade is serrated. It looks like it would not be very effective against most people. Unless you were going against someone's bare, tight-skinned torso, this weapon would be not super effective. And so there's a lot of reasons I don't like it, but anything that goes too far into the cringe fantasy elements like this one does is going to be ranked low for me. So that's why the Royal Bone Blade takes the number 17 spot. At number 16, we have the Barbed Sword. This one is slightly better than the last one, but kind of suffers the same type of things. It's weirdly designed so that it seems really small, and you're using, a Barbarian or something like that for it, or I guess a Rogue if you're using one-handed sword for a Rogue. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. It looks kind of small in the hand. It also has that weird barbed element, which, to be fair, as a thrusting weapon, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because it would obviously cause damage. The problem is pulling it out. Yes, would cause even more damage on the way out, but on the unfortunate side of that, it would require a lot of strength, and would be very exhausting to use it like that, because you'd constantly be ripping through people instead of sliding out. And it would just be more likely to get caught on armor and clothing. So I don't like those design elements. Other than that, I don't hate the way this one looks. It's got cool filigree and curvy stuff on the pommel that looks kind of neat. But yeah, I don't much care for the barbed sword, and that's why it takes the number 16 spot. At number 15, I've got the Obsidian Blade. This isn't one that I actually hate the look of it. I think it looks pretty cool. It's got what looks like a femur for the handle of it, and I think that's kind of cool. And it's got the Obsidian Blade going the rest of the way, which again, I think looks cool. Unfortunately, Obsidian makes a terrible weapon. The only thing you can make with Obsidian and have it be somewhat effective in a lot of circumstances are short blades that you're using for cutting or slashing that you're never going to use against any sort of metal, because obviously Obsidian would just shatter against metal. So it'd be great for a dagger that you're using to cut someone's throat or something. That or spear points or arrow tips, small pieces that aren't going up against metal, you're trying to hit unarmored flesh with them. That makes sense. A sword makes no sense, because your average opponent that you're going to go up against with a sword, unless they're totally unarmed and unarmored, is just going to shatter this thing. So Obsidian does not make a good weapon. That is a fantasy trope that I don't like, and that's why this one ranks low, even though it does look pretty cool. So the Obsidian Blade takes the number 15 spot. At number 14, we have the Broadsword, and I really just don't like this one because of the cleaver design of it. Now, obviously, that's not actually historically inaccurate. There are plenty of swords that were made that had no point towards the top because they were not stabbing weapons. That being said, they went out of fashion relatively quickly because most people realized that's totally unnecessary, because you can achieve the same effectiveness with almost the exact same weight and balance and everything like that, and have a point, which just makes it a more versatile weapon. On top of that, the broadsword has so the crossguard for this one isn't historically inaccurate per se. It's very accurate for like a classical arrow weapon, but the blade length and design makes that seem really weird together. So I don't absolutely hate this one, but it's got a lot of elements about it that I don't much care for, and that's why I ranked it relatively low. As an executioner's sword, it would probably be a very good weapon. In combat, I would rather have something with a point, and probably more of a cruciform style to the crossguard to protect my hands. Other than that, I don't hate the broadsword, but it does take the number 14 spot. In that same regard, we have the Bastard Sword coming in at number 13. I ranked this one higher for basically the reasons I just talked about. It's slightly shorter for the blade, which makes it more consistent with a cleaver type weapon, and makes me dislike the no point on the top a little bit less, I guess, even though I still don't much care for it. It's also tapered in a more aggressive way that kind of makes it look like it's balanced specifically for slashing and chopping, which again is alright. I do like that it has a longer, wider crossguard to protect the hand on it a lot better, and just overall the design doesn't look as anachronistic to me because it does look more like a medieval cleaver, which, you know, I can live with. It's not my personal favorite style of weapon, but it did exist and it was relatively common. So, the Bastard Sword takes the number 13 spot. At number 12, we have the Ghoul King's Blade. And now this one actually does look pretty cool, I'll admit that. It definitely falls into the edgelord fantasy stuff that I normally don't much care for, but it still looks pretty cool. The pommel of it is like a claw gripping onto a big purple stone, which looks super magical and fantastical, which is fun. The crossguard and like the bottom of the blade seems to be made out of bone. That would obviously not be great for protection, unless we're talking magic, in which case, you know, whatever, maybe it's super strong. But realistically, if that's bone, especially at that thickness, a sword strike glancing down your sword is just going to shear straight through that and go into your hand. So it would not offer very great protection. Along with that, we have what appears to be the spinal column and then tail of whatever animal this is running up the blade. It looks relatively cool. I'm not debating that, but it would really hamper the effectiveness of this weapon. I mean, it would give you sort of a grabbing aspect, so if someone slashed and you blocked, you know, turned your blade sideways to block, maybe their sword would bite in or whatever, and then maybe you could disarm them. I don't know realistically how effective that would actually be as a strategy, so mostly this would just make it much less effective as a stabbing weapon. I do actually like that you can see the secondary taper for the edge of the blade, and it actually does look sharp, so I actually really like that as a design element. But overall, despite the fact that this sword does look kind of cool in a fantasy sort of aspect, there's a lot of design elements about it that I don't much care for, and that's why it ranks relatively low at number 12. At number 11, we have the FLAMMARD. This one I just don't much care for. It's got what looks to be a jade handle, which is kind of interesting and unique. Either that or it's rusty copper, or not rusty, but, you know, oxidized copper. But I actually don't hate it. I actually kind of like the way that the crossguard, pommel, and grip looks on this sword. And the blade itself is also not historically inaccurate. There are plenty of examples of weapons that looked like this. Thing is, despite the fact that they were used, they're not that good of a weapon. You lose a lot of your effectiveness of as far as slashes go, especially against any type of armor. So this would be effective against bare skin, but it loses a lot of that effectiveness that swords normally have against things like lamellar armor, leather, as little as that was actually used, leather, fur, hide, and even against gambeson and things like that. The shorter slashing surfaces don't actually cut as well against lighter armor, and obviously swords don't slash well against plate or mail anyway, so you lose what little effectiveness as a slashing weapon you have as a sword by doing this with it. So that's why, even though historically you do find examples of this, it was not widespread. So again, it looks alright. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. So it takes the number 11 spot. At number 10, we've got a pretty cringe edgelordy one, the Skull and Steel. I ranked this one as high as I did just because, as cringe and edgelordy as it is, the blade itself is pretty good and would work pretty well. That being said, it's about half and half, which is a fantasy thing that I hate. You can see the edge of the crossguard stops about halfway along the total length of the blade, which is just stupid. It would throw off the balance of this weapon to be used one-handed. You'd basically have to use it two-handed, but then you're stuck with this really short blade. Outside of that, it's needlessly intricate and large and blocky, which would make it way heavier than it needs to be too. So there's a lot of reasons I don't care for it, but the design itself is relatively cool, I guess, from a fantasy aspect, and so that's why I have it. So that's the Skull and Steel at number 10. At number 9, we have the Serpent's Bite. I don't hate this one. It looks alright. I actually kind of like the fantasy elements of it. It looks pretty cool. It's got a very well tapered blade, which is historically accurate for dedicated stabbing weapons, especially in the late medieval period. It was actually pretty common to try and get between plate like that, so they'd have a very fine point, but they would still have a wider base for weight distribution and chopping ability and everything. It's got the twisty snakes for the crossguard, which is kind of a cool aesthetic look to it, and the same thing follows through in the pommel. Like I said, I kind of like the design on this one. Don't have a lot negative to say about it. It's a pretty cool looking weapon. So the Serpent's Bite takes the number 9 spot. At number 8, we have the Mangler, which overall design-wise I actually quite like. It looks pretty realistic for a lighter cavalry saber, especially especially with the Middle Eastern style to it. I don't have a whole lot that I don't like about it. I ranked it as low as I did just because it is a little undersized. Like, I'm not saying that's a historical problem, but in the hands of our Barbarian or even, you know, any of the other large classes, it just looks kind of comically small. But yeah, design-wise, looks pretty good. It's got the right curve to the blade, especially, like I said, to be used as a cavalry sword. But that being said, would have been very, very common to find foot soldiers using something very similar to this. So the Mangler is pretty good, and it takes the number 8 spot. Number 7, we have the LICH blade. I could have ranked this one lower, but I do kind of like it. It has a weirdly short grip to it, so it's super dedicated one-handed. It would be basically impossible to use this thing two-handed. And it has, of course, the high fantasy leaf blade aspect to it, which is historically, you can find it on some weapons, but it's not very common. I imagine just because it kind of throws off your blade geometry for stabbing. But that being said, it does look pretty cool. The main thing I don't like about it is the large skull and ribcage section down at the bottom of the blade. It just looks like it would make it needlessly heavy and wouldn't improve the strength or anything else of this weapon. So I think it looks kind of cool, but it definitely falls into that edgelord spectrum of a little bit too much fantasy for me. So that's the LICH blade at number 7. At number 6, we have the SABRE. I like this one for a lot of reasons. There's only one thing I don't like about it, and that's that it's named SABRE, whereas this is clearly a cruciform bastard sword. So that's weird. I don't much care for that, but like I said, design-wise, I do like it. It's a little bit more patinaed. I would have a more polished blade, but that's just because I would be maintaining it. I like it other than that. It's just a great example of historically or somewhat historically authentic bastard sword. And I like it. Not a lot of complaints there. Nice wide fuller. It looks good. So that's the SABRE at number 6. Number 5, we have the DOOMBLADE. This one just reminds me of a wall hanger, but that being said, if we're going to assume that this is made out of high carbon steel and is a full tang weapon, there's no reason it wouldn't be effective. It's obviously got way more of an intricate blade than you would see on most historical things, but nothing on the blade really would make it ineffective as a weapon. It's obviously way too thick for a sword. That's like 3 to 4 times the thickness of any sword I've ever had. So definitely not great there, but you know, that's a video game problem, not really a design specific thing. It's just easier to animate that way because that way they can track it's thicker. But anyway, I don't dislike this one. I like the pommel. It's got a cool kind of sharp triangular aspect to it, which if you wanted to, you could use for, you know, pommel striking in a stabby type motion. So I actually kind of like the DOOMBLADE, even though it has some fantasy and video game trope elements to it. I do like the way it looks. At number 4, we've got the War Sword. This is another one that's got some clearly Eastern inspiration to it, but I genuinely like this one. It's got a much thicker blade, and so it looks a lot more substantial in the hand. It's got even sharper of a curvature to it, but really, I just genuinely like this one. Not a lot bad to say about it. I've rocked this one quite a bit. It looks super cool, and it looks really, really cool when you're dual wielding it. So yeah, the War Sword, nothing wrong with this design. I really like it. So that's number 4. At number 3, we have the FALCHIon, which I genuinely like. It's a really cool design. I've got no problem with it, except for the fact that they called it the FALCHIon, because this doesn't look anything like a FALCHIon. It looks a lot more like a Gladius, if I'm being honest. That being said, I do like it. It's a little bit out of place in the high medieval fantasy sphere because it looks a lot more like something you'd find in the classical period, but I like it. It's got a very aggressive, sharp point to it, which would make it excellent for stabbing, but the rest of the blade geometry is normal for a slashing weapon. Really, the funny thing about this sword is if you were to put a cruciform crossguard on it, it would look like a pretty standard late medieval arming sword. So that's the interesting thing. But I do like this one. I think it looks good. I love the design elements. It's got kind of a weathered copper bronze look to it, which I really, really like. So yeah, the FALCHIon takes the number 3 spot. At number 2, we have the military sword. This is another one of my favorites. It has the slight leaf-bladed aspect to it, so a little bit high on the fantasy aspect. The crossguard, again, is more towards that. Wouldn't actually offer a whole lot of protection, but it does look very cool. It's got a sleek design. I like how big it looks. It's got a wide blade, so again, it feels right in the Barbarian's hand and looks very cool when dual-wielded. The pommel is interesting. I don't have a whole lot of words for it. It looks like heavy lead shot inside of a brass ring. It's cool and unique, and I like it. So the military sword takes the number 2 spot for me. And at number 1, we've got my personal favorite, the short sword. This one is basically perfect. It's got everything that a late medieval arming sword / bastard sword should have. Nicely tapered blade. Doesn't actually have a fuller. It does change the blade geometry along the middle to give it that, you know, third dimension to it, but it's not actually a fuller, so this blade, I imagine, would be pretty dang rigid. It does have the standard cruciform design, and I really like it. Not a whole lot to complain about there. there. I genuinely like that one. So that is all of the one-handed swords that I've been able to find in Diablo 4. If you know what this mysterious last one that I haven't unlocked is, please let me know. But yeah, that's my ranking for them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you disagree with anything I've said, why don't you let me know down in the comment section. But that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you like this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.